Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your patience. My name is Rose Peter Graham. I anchor Rose on all sides on Ben Television, a live broadcast every Thursday between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. And it's so good to be here. I would like to officially welcome you to the 10th Ralph Opara Memorial Lecture by the National Association of Seadogs with the topic, Brexit is implication for sub-Saharan Africa. There's been a lot of discussion about Brexit. Every politically inclined minds and opinionated tongues have something to say about it. Of course, because one way or the other, it will impact on everyone, especially in Africa. And also, there is this empirical evidence that anything that happens in the UK directly impacts on trade, investments, and aid to Africa. And with the UK leaving the EU, what is going to happen to us? Of course, there's that other saying that when any of this first world nation sneezes, Africa catches cold. How far are we going to freeze this time around? What's going to happen to AIDS, global economy, bilateral development trade across that region? Today we're going to have insights into this with the vetted discussants we have in our midst here today. I would like to, first of all, before I introduce them, have us all rise for the national anthem. I don't have the DJ here to support me, but we can go ahead and do that. It's our country. Okay. 3, 2, 1.
Arise, O compatriots, Nigeria's call obey, to serve our father's land, with love and strength and faith. The labor of our heroes shall never be in vain. To serve with heart and mind, one nation bound in freedom, peace and unity.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want for you to give a fine welcome to our guest, our keynote speaker for today, Asari St. Hill, a business growth expert. Please a round of applause for him. Mr. Asari was born in London, England, the son of immigrants from the Caribbean. He spent 25 years in public service, working for local government and the Audit Commission, when he gained an overall of government policies across public services. He joined the Audit Commission as a performance specialist in the year 2000, where he helped to develop the business planning process to drive improvements across local governments and the NHS services across London. Asari has served in various capacities in the public and private sector, as well as volunteering, namely non-executive director, board member of the Waltham Forest NHS Primary Care Trust, Equalities and Diversity Advisor for the National Center for Diversity, member of the Audit and Rigs Committee of Newland Housing Group, amongst other positions that he has occupied in his illustrious career. Mr. Asari holds a master's degree in business administration from the prestigious Aston School, Business School, and currently driving business mentorship as a business growth expert and coach. Over the last 7 years, he has coached a wide range of businesses and business people, from multi-million-pound business owners to sole traders who are seeking to improve their businesses or increase capacity. As a business mentor, he runs training sessions for teams, business seminars, business planning sessions, and workshops. Mr. Asari is a Pan-Africanist who has studied Africa for over 30 years. His voluntary work over the years includes public speaking on the politics of Africa and the diaspora. He is a political commentator who has studied politics since his teenage years. Mr. Asari has traveled extensively across the world and has visited Asia, North America, Europe, Africa, Ghana, Kenya, Egypt, the Gambia, and will be visiting Rwanda in September. A round of applause. With that visit, we would love to hear about the outcome. Okay, I would love to call on our discussants. Please, ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for Dr. Dolapo Sikwadi. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Dr. Dolapo is a British-born psychiatrist and physioanalyst, a playwright, dramatic critic, and artist who inhabits both the artistic and scientific worlds with equal accord, while constantly seeking to expand the frontiers of his knowledge in both. Mr. Dolapo's interests include drama as therapy, as a tool for social mobilization, and what he calls the literature of drama. Dolapo is a member of the Royal College of Psychiatrists and applied drama in his area of specialization. Currently, Dolapo is an associate specialist psychiatrist who is among the very few psychiatrists in the world that use drama in the treatment of patients. Dolapo is a multi-talented intellectual with a rare gift of ease of combining science and art in service to humanity. He is a practicing medical doctor who also holds a postgraduate diploma and master's degree in drama. As a playwright and dramatist, Dolapo majors in dramatic criticism, using street theater and drama as therapy. Driven by sheer passion to lift mankind from the humdrums of abject poverty, Dolapo is committed to challenging the status quo and combating the ills of government negligence to the citizens of Nigeria. He is a human rights activist, a respected political commentator and analyst who bears the marks of the pro-democracy struggle and military brutality in the wake of the June 12 struggle. Dolapo is the author of the theatrical aesthetics of Wale Soyinka and the Pyrates Confraternity, Behind the Barricades, a play, amongst other books. Dolapo is the director of Child Lifeline Home for Street Children UK, as well as a trustee of the National Association of Seadogs. Thank you for being with us. And then, of course, we have Priscilla Nweko in our midst, a renowned broadcaster. Madam, please, we have you join the rest of the discussion. Priscilla is a freelance award-winning broadcaster. She's a seasoned political and public affairs analyst and moderator. Priscilla began her TV career with Ben Television as a presenter and a public affairs analyst. She has anchored a host of programs which has seen her engage and interview high-profile guests, including captains of industries, African and UK political leaders, and head of states. Indeed, Priscilla was granted an exclusive interview with David Cameron as Prime Minister, and also invited and granted an exclusive recording of the Easter reception at number 10 Downing Street. As a political and public affairs analyst, Priscilla has been called the voice of reason, with an ability to study the trends and predict the outcome. Priscilla has participated in various serious conversations in the UK, including campaigning during the European Union referendum in 2016. She's also very objective in presenting her views. This has earned her commendations as a woman in an industry dominated by men. She features in an expert contributor. She features as an expert contributor on current affairs programs. She also makes regular appearances on various programs across different TV channels in the UK. Priscilla is an effective, engaging communicator, presenter, compare, moderator for high-profile events ranging from politics to business summits. Her eloquence and passion as a speaker has made her an inevitable choice for some major public and private events. As a leading voice on African issues, Priscilla is very passionate about the African diaspora communities across Europe and believes that they should have a voice. Priscilla has worked constantly as a bridge to engage the African diaspora community with leadership in the diaspora as well as the African continent. She currently appears as guest contributor on the program JHUK for Yanga TV and TVC, Talk Africa for GNTV, Scope for India's News, Pakistan, and African Today for Press TV. Thank you very much, Mama. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to also call on the National Association of Seadogs, Capone, Mr. Emmanuel Bahabo, who is part of our discussion today. Thank you very much, sir. Have your seat. Mr. Emmanuel Bahabo is the partner in the dispute resolution, corporate governance, and compliance practice of the firm he's with. He has nearly 3 decades of experience as a seasoned litigator and trusted compliance and corporate counsel. He is highly regarded for his work in conducting and or supervising on some of the most sensitive corporate internal investigations that have occurred in the Nigerian market in the past 15 years. His practice and officers as well as regulatory and public authorities in connection with white-collar crime, asset tracing, government and compliance matters. He rejoined Templars in 2019 from the position of Group Head of Legal Services for Saharan Group, a leading international energy and infrastructure conglomerate with operations in over 38 countries across Africa, Middle East, Europe, and Asia. Before Sahara, he played a pivotal role in the growth of the dispute resolution practice of the firm and acted as lead counsel on numerous court and arbitral proceedings arising from diverse sectors, including oil, gas, and power, banking and finance, shipping and maritime, information technology and intellectual property and real estate. He was particularly active in representing international oil companies in relation to the defense and settlement of oil spill litigation and similar environmental damage claims. His experience includes representing a multinational oil company in connection with the defense and or settlement of several lawsuits from 40,000 barrel Idoho QIT oil spillage in the Niger Delta region. He also represented Emerald Energy Resources Limited in LCIA arbitration. He also represented the Delta State government in a multi-billion, multi-party arbitration initiated by the Econet Wireless Limited in respect of an alleged breach of the preemptive rights provisions of a shareholder agreement. Successfully representing also the Telegraph Media Group, UK publishers of the Daily Telegraph of London in a 350 million naira libel claim instituted against it at the High Court of Lagos State, following an article published in the Sunday Telegraph in England and on the internet. He also represented Google International and YouTube Incorporated in a claim of 250 million naira in a search engine liability claim brought against the companies on grounds of breach of privacy rights. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, before I get our discussant and the keynote speaker to start this up, I will implore us once again to please put our phones on silent. Thank you very much. So the floor is now for our key speaker, Mr. Asari St. Hill. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you to the organisers for inviting me to have this opportunity to talk about my favourite subject, not Brexit, Africa. My favourite subject is Africa and anything to do with Africa and African people. Brexit just happens to be the context we're going to talk about today. So, I've had the fortune of travelling to different parts of the world, and that's quite interesting in terms of seeing that all peoples, wherever you live in the world, all want the same things. They want peace, they want a home to live in, a decent dignity in work, dignity in retirement, pensions, healthcare, education for their children, etc. Everybody wants the same things. So it's the context in which I'll be talking today. The summary, just an overview on what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to mention what gave rise to the European integration. Because the whole project that gave rise to this whole Brexit question, we need to go back in history to understand what's the context of why Europe is integrated. And there's some serious lessons there for us in Africa as well. The relationship between Britain and Africa, what has it been historically, which we more or less know, but we need to look at that too. What about Africa's vision for continental unity? We can't not mention that yesterday, Africa has decided, as from yesterday, of continental unity. That's very significant, right, historically, right now. And I bet everybody in the room doesn't even know. That we've signed an agreement, most African countries have signed an agreement to integrate Africa, and that starts from yesterday, the 30th. So it's quite interesting to see that whilst Europe is pulling itself apart, Africa is getting into unity. So it's quite interesting, we'll come look at that. The context of Brexit and the whole referendum, what gave rise to the referendum? Where did this come from? What was the context of how it happened? And what are the implications for us in terms of the result? We're still very unclear what's happening. All things are possible. Will it happen? Will it not happen? Will it be a hard Brexit? Will it be a soft Brexit? I think everything is in the air right now. So it's interesting to look at that. And if you live here, what's the implications and also and for Africa as well? So we'll finish off by talking about the consequences of Brexit for Africa. And what are the implications? Is there trade opportunities? Is there travel opportunities? Education opportunities? What other opportunities are there for African people to benefit from Brexit or not Brexit, depending on how you look at it? And to see how has the European Union treated us over the last 50 odd years of their having unity. So that's the context which I'm going to have. I'm going to challenge some of the narrative and some of the language that's used. Because some language that's being used is dangerous and misleading and racist, to be honest. Because the whole notion of Brexit, a lot of it is around immigration and the fear of other, the fear of foreigners, the fear of other people, brown people, but also Eastern Europeans as well, with the new influx. So we need to challenge some of that. But the thing is today, whatever I say, it's whose interest that we need to look at this from. And my talk today is going to be from the interest of Africans, our people. What is the interest, our interest in this question? Because you can live here and say, oh, should we leave, should we stay? But how are you looking at it? Are you looking at it from the point of view of being a British citizen or in the interest of Africa as a whole? And it's not necessarily the same. So you can live comfortably. You know better than I do in Nigeria. You can live in a big house, have 7 Mercedes, however much millions in the bank, and outside your house is the roads not even repaired. And you don't care about anything else around you. So what type of society do we want as well? So it's all right to say, I'm okay here in England, but what about our people back home in Africa? How are they living and what's the dignity of them? So the choice I make here for Brexit may not be necessarily the best choice for our people in Africa. So it's not necessarily the same situation. So let's look at this history. Let's look at this history of Europe for a start, because there's loads of misinformation and language that's used about Africa and about Europe. So the first thing is Europeans are very united. Well, actually, the history of Europe shows there hasn't been a day in the history of Europe where there hasn't been war. Yeah, the history of Europe is war, 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 war. If you look at the First and Second World Wars, just as an example, which are not world wars, by the way, because again, language is very important. We're all taught in school, and I'm sure you're taught in Nigeria, that there was a First World War and a Second World War. No, there wasn't. There was a European war first, and a second European war, which they had the world involved in. We heard the term, if you live in the UK, you will constantly hear about black-on-black violence. Why is it black boys stabbing other black boys, etc., etc.? But if you look at murder and crime, most crime is committed by somebody in your own community, somebody that you know. Most murders or violent crime is by somebody you know. So the chance of it being somebody in your community is very, very clear. So the concept of black-on-black violence is a racist term. It's a very racist term because when white people kill each other, they don't say white-on-white violence. Let's just look at some data on this. Just look at some examples. So let's look at the war in Europe, okay? Because this is what gave rise to European integration, okay? So let's look at the First and Second World War. Russia deployed 12 million men, mostly men. They lost 1.7 million people. So in these two wars, 1.7 million people. 4.9 billion injured. The British Empire, which they still believe is an empire, there's no empire anymore. The British Empire is long gone. Sun set on the British Empire a long time ago. They used to say in the 1950s, they said the sun will never set on the British Empire. The sun is not only set, it's gone, and it's darkness. I'm going to give you some reasons why I'm saying that. Yes, Britain is still a powerful nation, but the empire days are long gone. And when Trump says, make America great again, the British say, make Britain great again, what we have to look at from an African point of view is, when was Britain great, and when was America great? Because when people talk about when America was great, this is when they were lynching us. This is when we couldn't vote. This is when they were treating us like second-class citizens, right? But when you say Britain was great, when was Britain great? When they had all the colonies? When we had to do everything they said? So we have to be very careful about when people say make Britain great again, we have to look at each other and say, when was it great for us? Because I can't remember when it was great for us, right? So we have to be careful with that one. So the British Empire, 8.9 million people deployed, and also in history, what they often don't say is the amount of our people who got involved. Europe versus Europe, white-on-white violence, white men killing and massacring other white men, basic working class men, massacring each other, right? For a fight. And what was the fight about? So let's look at these stats again. Nearly 1 million people, soldiers lost in British Empire. 2 million wounded. France, 4.2 wounded. Across the whole of Europe, 8.5 million killed. But they don't call it white-on-white violence. So a couple people die in Lewisham. It's the word crisis. Yeah? We have wars in Africa where we know people have died. I'm going to Rwanda soon. It's the 25th anniversary this year of the massacre in Rwanda. But again, who was behind it? The Belgians. The Europeans were behind this confusion of, we know in Nigeria, same thing, ethnic divisions that are based on what? So your ethnicity is different to mine? Do you want a different house to me? Are we going to drive on a different road? Are we going to go to different schools? We want the same things. So these ethnic differences are artificial. They're exploited often by politicians. Exploited by people to get us to fight each other when actually there's no difference between one person and another. You can't even tell sometimes what tribe somebody's in, what language they speak until they open their mouth or they start to tell you something about who they are. It's irrelevant. It's significant as in pride, yes. Culture, yes. But it shouldn't be the main thing that unites us. We should unite as African people or Nigerians and build a great nation. And that's what we have to compare and contrast here. So why was the war, why did the war happen? Many people don't know why the war happened. Why did Europe fight the First and Second World War? They tell you all kind of things about Nazi Germany, it was about the Jews and freedom. That's all nonsense, that's all lies. It became an issue later, the massacre of the Jews, but that wasn't the reason. Do you know in 1884, 1885, what happened? What happened? The Berlin Conference, right? And the Berlin Conference is when Europeans sat down and divided Africa between them. Yes? 1884, 1885. What did Germany get out of that meeting? Nothing. Little bits and pieces, but they really didn't get anything. So the German people, the German elite, were not happy and would never let it rest that they didn't get anything out of the Berlin Conference. In 1911, a German warship sailed into Morocco. They also invaded Belgium and the Belgian Congo. That is what's triggered the first so-called World War. Because Germany wanted a slice of the pie, and they weren't getting a slice, and they said, look, we're going to take our slice, we're going to become military, and we're going to take our share. And it was a fight about Africa and Asia. So that's the beginning of this story. So the whole fight was a fight of who would control Africa and Asia. And that's a very important backdrop, because after the massacre of 9 million people, Europe leaders said we must never let this happen again. We can't have a situation where we're killing each other, millions of people are being killed. And remember, Europe was in tatters. Britain was on its knees. From an empire, the British Empire, to 1945, people were on rations. The country was struggling because everything in the country all the resources had to go into the war effort. All the steel in the country had to be used. Men had to be deployed. Women got employment for the first time, not because they wanted women's rights, but because women were needed, because so many men were dying, so many men were off in the war, that women had to get into the employment. And then when they wanted to put women back in their boxes, women said, no, we're not going back in our box now. Right? We want to stay employed and stay. So this is what changed the situation, okay? And then as Britain and Europe got so weak, this is where the rise of the United States came. Again, on the back of us, of our free labor. But when Britain and Europe decided this can never happen again, they had to borrow what was equivalent of $100 billion from the US to rebuild Britain. They were on their knees. But as a result of them being weak, it helped us in the colonies. Because what was happening in the colonies? We were fighting for our independence. But Britain was now too weak to defend every front. They had all these colonies around the world. They couldn't look after all of them anymore. They couldn't deal with it. Well, they weren't looking after us, but I mean looking after it from their interests. They were struggling, right? So what happened around that time? 1947, what happened? So we have these dates, okay? These are the things that changed. 1947, India got their independence. 1949, China got their independence. But did they get it because the British said, here you go, we understand we did you a wrong, here's the independence? No, that's after they massacred all the Indians. They did a massacre in India that was a shame, that's still in history, where they massacred all these Indian people who were fighting them, were protesting, against them. China, how did China get its independence? Again, it had to fight a war. Yeah, it had to fight a military war to get their independence. And look where China is now. We'll come back to that later about where China has done, what China has achieved. And also Ghana, the first sub-Saharan independent nation, 1957. Do you know what happened in 1945? Anybody heard of the 5th Pan-African Congress? The 5th Pan-African Congress was here in Manchester in 1945, straight after the war. The Trade Union Congress here held a meeting of the trade union movement. And on the back of it, we had a Pan-African Congress here in Manchester in 1945. I commemorated it in 1990 when I came up to Manchester to do a talk back all those years ago. People don't know about that history. That's when, for the first time, Africans came together politically, talking about the independence of the African continent. From the trade union movement, from the agricultural sectors, from the political sectors, all of these different leaders came to Manchester to talk about this issue in 1945. And it only took us 12 years more for Ghana to be independent in 1957. So we made massive progress. So this is what I'm saying, that on the back of that, the disintegration, the struggle in Europe, it led to some changes that made it easier for us to get our independence. And similarly, my parents are from the Caribbean. The Caribbean also got independence into the 60s and the 70s. Most of the Caribbean countries are now independent nations as well. But the problem we have is we have a flag and the big house, but we don't always control the money in the country. And those who do control the money, well, some of them are not doing the right things with it. We'll come back to that, and governance. What can we learn from that? So European integration, that's where it came from. So when we have the EEC, because it's now called the European Union, right? We have the EEC, was formed in 1957. But they started from 1951. France, Germany got together around coal and started to integrate their economic front. It was all an economic argument at that time. See, why the British are so angry, when they claim they're so angry, is because it turned into a political unity. Britain always said we never signed up for political unity. We only signed up for economic integration, which is a lie. Okay? Because Maggie Thatcher, anybody know who Thatcher is? Thatcher, the milk snatcher. Unfortunately, we know who Thatcher is. Alright? The wicked witch. Thatcher signed the Maastricht Treaty in 92, implemented in 93, which was the political union of Europe. The Conservatives took Britain into the European Union first, then Labour had a referendum. So it's important we know this history, because people pretend that they were hoodwinked. They pretend that it wasn't what they signed up for. Yes, it was. It was written on a piece of paper in Maastricht. It said, it's a political union, we're moving to political union. And Thatcher signed a piece of paper to say, we're moving to political union. And that's what created the referendum party. You heard of UKIP? Well, before UKIP, there was the referendum party. The referendum party was formed to fight to have another referendum to get out of Europe. Sound familiar? Then UKIP was formed to get Britain out of Europe. Okay, so UKIP has had a 25-year campaign to get to the day where they had the referendum in 2016. Okay, so it's important that we understand the context for all this. And so Europe said we can never have a war again in Europe. Okay, though there has been wars, there's a Bosnian war and other wars in Europe, but the European Union hasn't had a war. Between the European Union states, there's been no war, right? France said, we're never going to let this happen again. That's why France got nuclear weapons. France said, we're never going to let Germany ever invade us again. This is never going to happen again. So that's what the basis of it was, to avoid war and have peace in Europe and peaceful development. Okay? But one thing they were unified in, the exploitation of Africa and the exploitation of Asia. They unified around that. And however much they say that the European Union is good for Africa, the European Union predominantly has exploited Africa and still exploits us now. The Francophone nations are still paying. You know, the French-speaking countries in Africa still have to pay resources for a French bank, have to pay their money into the French government, and then the French government decides how much they can get back. In 2019, we still got this crazy association where an African country that's supposedly independent has to pay all its resources into France and get permission from the French president about what we can spend on our own people. This is madness. And then they say the European Union, we're here to help, and we're going to help the rest of Africa. Well, it's not helping us. It's not helping us at all. So let's look at what they did. What did they say about European? They wanted common currency, no borders. They're talking about a military for Europe. That's what Britain hated. No, Britain said, no, we're not having a European army. Okay, but they have NATO. NATO's already an integrated army, so what's this emotional, they're fooling the British public all the time with this stuff. NATO's been around for what, 50 odd years, which is an alliance mostly of European nations, yeah? Alliance, a military alliance. So what's a European army? What's the difference? And NATO's basic principle, if you invade one of us, we will all come after you. That's the basic principle of NATO, right? What's the difference in Europe? If somebody tries to attack France, Britain will defend them. If somebody tries to attack Britain, France will defend them, America will defend them. So it's kind of an imagination, some of the stuff they moan about. There's an illusion, and they're playing with the British public. So all these things they talked about, one central bank, common currency, they've got the euro, yeah? What was Nkrumah talking about back in the 1950s? What were we talking about back in the 1950s? Hey, I bought the book. Anybody seen this book, Africa Must Unite? By Kwame Nkrumah. He wrote this book in the 50s and 60s. And what did he say about African integration? We need to have a common currency. We need to have a central bank. We need to have common borders. Get rid of all the borders. One passport. Exactly what they implemented yesterday in Africa. It's taken them 60 years after Nkrumah to implement what we said we should have implemented back in the 50s and 60s. We didn't need the example of Europe to do it for us. We already knew what we needed to do. Integrated government. Integrated military. We had all those integrations. It'd be phenomenal. Do you know that in all the African economies, only 16% of our trade is done between African countries? In Europe, it's 90%. 90% of their trade is done with each other. Only 16% of our trade is done with each other. But we know why. Because all the roads, the flights, the railways in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Angola were all designed to export resources back to Europe. They weren't designed for us to trade with each other. So if you want to get a flight from Nigeria to a so-called French-speaking place, you might have to travel to Belgium or Paris and then travel back to Africa. How crazy is that? So you can't get a flight easily from Nigeria to a French-speaking Africa. You have to go to France or Belgium first, get a flight there, and then come back to Africa again. That's madness. So if I want to fly from Paris to London or London to Paris, how would it be if you had to go to Nigeria first to go to Paris? People would say, but why am I'm only flying from here to Paris. Why have I got to go to Nigeria first and then get another plane and then fly to Paris? People would say it's absurd. And we're doing this all the time. So the integration is not there. So part of the reason for the lack of... We must make sure it doesn't disintegrate in the way that it's starting to disintegrate Britain League. So that's the context. I wanted to put that context there and just get you to understand some of those things. Now, one of the things with the European Union, when we come to this whole question of Brexit, who voted for the European Union? Who's so angry about joining the European Union? There's basically two groups of people. Now, predominantly it's one group, but that one group is influencing everybody else. The working class, the white working class are very confused. Okay, the working class in any country can be confused easily by the leaders of the country because the TV, the newspaper and everything confusing people all the time. So the white working class predominantly voted for Brexit. All the evidence is there. This book here, this is another good book by Akala. Anybody heard of Akala? Yeah. Akala, the fact to call him a poet is not enough, isn't it? Political commentator, and he was famous for doing poetry first, but then he's a political commentator. He's written this book called The Natives. It's a very clever book using the term natives. He basically means us. But he's making a bit of a joke on the way the British are, and he put some data in here about the voting on Brexit. And he talked about 70% of the white working class voted leave. Predominantly the working class whites voted leave, but predominantly working class Africans, we voted remain. So, if Europe is bad for the working class, why is it the black working class didn't vote? Because people campaigning, going on about immigration, how we hate, we want to curb immigration, that message don't go too well in our communities. That's it. So when you see people campaigning, Farage going on TV and he put that big banner saying, we're being invaded, we're being flooded, with all these immigrants, that don't go well down with our communities. We're saying, hang on, is he talking about us? So you're not going to get our vote, in any large numbers, If you see an African in UKIP, you're thinking, does he know what this party is all about? Isn't it? You see an African in UKIP, that should be the first one on the boat. You vote for ending immigration and you're an immigrant. You should be the first one to chuck out. Okay? So we have to look at this whole question of confusion around Brexit. So the elite in Britain, when you look at people like Boris Johnson, what school did he go to? Eton. How much does it cost to go to Eton? 30,000, 40,000 a year? These are the kind of people. What about Moss? Rees Moss, or whatever his name is. I try to not remember his name because it just winds me up whenever I see him. The elite. These are the real elite in Britain. Okay? They're the ones who still believe in the empire. They still believe in the days of the empire. When was Britain great? When was Britain great? I don't know when Britain was great. Because they should remove that word great from the word Great Britain anyway. But Britain wasn't great for us. That's the question we have to ask. This is why I say I'm doing this whole presentation from the point of view of our people and what happened with us. So yes, the European Union has made great changes. So I'm making a joke of some things. But if we be factual and open, if you're European, the European Union has been good for Europe. Because poverty has been massively reduced in Europe. There's no doubt about it. At the beginning of the 20th century, most of the working class were living in squalor. Didn't have access to healthcare, didn't have access to free education. It was only 1944 that they brought in free education up to 16 in England. It was only in the beginning of the 19th century women got the vote. So social care, social housing, predominantly post-war. So they did alleviate poverty, they did have massive industrial expansion, and there was good rights. People have got benefits at work, pensions, all those rights that we see in Europe, and infrastructure development, etc. has been achieved. So Europe has been, the European Union as an economic model has done well for Europe, predominantly for a lot of the the people of Europe, right? But there's still a large number who don't feel they're doing so well. They're the ones who feel they're missing out. So, the white working class in this country who are on 0-hour contracts, who leave school without a very poor paid job, or underemployed. You know, to be employed in this country, they say there's record employment. You only have to be employed for 1 hour a week. If you're employed for 1 hour a week, you're not unemployed. You're employed. 1 hour. Okay? So many people who they claim are employed are underemployed. They can't afford. You heard of the concept of jams? Just about managing? There's millions of people who are jams. Just about managing. They're not, the income that people are earning is not enough for them to pay their bills. It's not enough for them to cover all of their mortgages or their rent and to live in any dignity. So that's why the benefit system is topping up. Why is the benefit system, most of the benefits in this country, this is another myth, the benefits go to the undeserving poor, but most people who get benefits in this country are workers. Now the question is, if you're a worker in Europe, why do you need benefits? It's because your pay is so low that the state has to top it up for you to survive. That's why you get benefits, right? Because the threshold of pay is too low. Even with the minimum wage, it's not enough. Especially if you're in London and places like that, yes? So this is the context in which I'm coming to, the implications for Africa when I come to this whole question of Brexit. What gave rise to Brexit? The reason is the Conservative Party, which is predominantly the right in this country, the right wing in this country and the elites, have never been happy because they see Britain as an empire and a mini island that never wants to need Europe, doesn't want to integrate with Europe, and has never been happy with that marriage. And have campaigned from day one to get out. That's why the first referendum was done, the Labour Party inherited it from the Conservatives. The Conservatives took Britain into the European Union. Labour saw the controversy, and some of the left were a bit concerned about Europe's power and where was it going, is it all for big business? But the Ford, for example, and it's in Tony Benn's papers and people who were in government then, Ford Motor Company said, if Britain doesn't join the European Union, we're going to pull out all our plants. And many other people said the same thing. If you don't join the European Union, we're pulling out all our businesses and we're going to go into Europe. So the government felt that they were bounced into, we have to go into this union because otherwise we're going to lose all these jobs and employment. That makes sense? So that's the context in which that happened. So there's always been this unhappy situation, and there's been a campaign for years to get Britain out of Europe. And so many Conservative leaders have been brought down over this issue. The reason why Cameron did the referendum is because Cameron, remember, the Conservative Party hasn't had a majority in this country since the 1992 election. They went 23 years without a majority. And they said, and Cameron realized, because remember it was a coalition 2010, right? So 2015, that election, Cameron thought, I'm going to play my trump card. Sorry for the word Trump, but the Trump card, right? And his Trump card was, promise a referendum on Europe. Because the Conservative Party was being torn apart by the whole question of Europe. They were constantly arguing about getting out of Europe. And UKIP was doing very well. And UKIP was stealing people from the Conservatives. Conservatives were defecting to the UKIP, and people were voting for UKIP in large numbers. So the Conservative Party said, look, we need to deal with this issue. So Cameron gambled and said, I promise a referendum, hoping he'd win the election. It worked. Because he won the election in 2015, even though everybody said it was going to be a hung parliament. So in 2015 he won with a majority of about 30, but it was a majority that nobody thought he would get. But the problem was, now he won, he had to do the referendum. Because you bluff, but you have to now deliver. So he said do the referendum, but he thought he would win. He thought he would silence the Brexiteers. He thought he would silence them, have the referendum, win the referendum, and that would silence it for a generation. Because once they lose, you could say, look, we've had the referendum, we had one 25 years ago, 50 years ago, whatever, that's it, finished. But it didn't go the way he wanted. The referendum was lost, and the Brexiteers won. And yes, there was lots of lies. We still, what's his name, Boris Johnson is in court yesterday for saying 350 million a day to the NHS. A lie. And some businessman says, I'm going to use my money and take him to court and humiliate him and take him to court and say you lied. And they're saying in Britain, this is not right. You shouldn't take him to court for a lie. Why not? That's accountability, isn't it? The judge said there's a case to answer. He blatantly lied. We all know he lied. And now he's going to try and become the Prime Minister. It's very embarrassing. Whilst he's trying to become Prime Minister, he's held up in court to say, yeah, but you lied. You told us we were going to get 350 million a day to the European Union, which was a lie. It didn't happen. So he made it up. And it was on a big bus. It was all on big Fords. So this was a lie. So this is one of the things we see. So that's the context. So let's move on and talk about consequences for Africa. So, Brexit or no Brexit? Where are we on the question of Brexit? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? You see, I think from an African point of view, it doesn't necessarily matter whether there's Brexit or not. I don't think it makes that much difference to us in Africa personally. But I do believe there is opportunities under Brexit, under the European Union rules. It does make it difficult for Africa to trade into Europe because of the tariffs. Now, have you heard of this most indebted nations? There's a concept called the most indebted nations. There's about 29 countries in Africa that come under most indebted nations. And under the European Union rules, they've made a concession. They claim a concession. Why do you think we're indebted, by the way? Right? You lend me money, okay? You lend me so much money, you impoverish me, then I lend you money, you can't pay it back, and I say you're the most indebted. You know what? I help you to buy my goods and sell your goods over me. But it's me that put you in that situation in the first place. So it's interesting, these kind of concepts. But nevertheless, the 29 most indebted nations are allowed tariff-free imports into Britain and Europe. So that's the context of it. So we've already got some level of free, so-called free trade. But the problem is, every country in the world protected their trade. And those who promote free trade now, all the ones who protected their trade when they were weak, now they're strong, they want free trade. China didn't want free trade for the first 20, 30 years. Now they want free trade because China's now powerful and they've got big businesses. Europe didn't believe in free trade, but now Europe is powerful and got all the industries, they want free trade. Do you see my point? Every country, developing country in the world, protected their industries first and let them get strong. And when they were strong, they then went for free trade. Is that fair? You name any country in the world that has got to be a powerful economic nation with democracy, because that's the other lie, that you have to have a liberal democracy before you can develop. This is what they teach us all the time in Africa, right? Name me a country who's done it. Anybody shout out country? Because I can't name any. Name me one.
United States.
United States, okay. So United States, when it became powerful economically, was it a liberal democracy? Because I know we couldn't vote. And they had a lot of free labor, right? So it wasn't a democracy. True?
Yeah, true.
Name another one. Singapore, okay. Singapore, one of my favorite countries, in many ways. But let's look at the truth of Singapore. Singapore was divorced. Malaysia said, Singapore hasn't got any resources. Singapore's a waste of time. There's too many Chinese. Let's divorce them. And in 1965 they said, you guys can have independence because I can't see any use in having you guys. And it's too many Chinese, so you can go off. And in 1965, Singapore was a swamp and a port. That's it. Within 30, 40 years, it's a first-class nation. Because of the phenomenal stuff. Leader is in prison for sodomy. Why is he in prison for sodomy? It's a bogus. No, really. Come on, this is a bogus charge. This is just something to get rid of him. So the point I'm saying is, you have one party. Japan. How many parties ruled in Japan since the war? One. So all these places they tell us about democracy, the reality is they didn't have democracy during their most biggest economic development. South Korea, dictator, military dictatorship Korea. Now it's got democracy now, but when it was developing, dictatorship. Yeah? Britain, the mother of all democracies. When it became the mother of all democracies, so-called the mother of all democracies, and Britain was at its highest, as an empire, women couldn't vote. Working class people couldn't vote. Okay, so it wasn't a liberal democracy, it was a dictatorship. Because it had colonies all around the world. Look at Hong Kong. The people complain about Hong Kong. It doesn't have democracy in Hong Kong. Let's go back a few years ago. Who was running Hong Kong? The governor. A British governor was running Hong Kong for 200 years. And then China get Hong Kong back for 2 days. And you say, it's not fair, these people haven't got democracy. And you were running China from London for 200 years, and then China take it over and you say, yeah, but it's not fair that these people don't have democracy. But Hong Kong is an economic superpower, right? Relatively speaking for its size, yes? But no democracy. Was there? Yeah, so no liberal democracy. So if we look at all of these countries in the world that have risen up, we look at the history of them, actually, we're telling a story here. So there's something we can learn from some of that. I'm not saying we don't have democracy in Nigeria, right? But what I'm saying is, liberal democracy in Nigeria is not, has it worked? No. So liberal democracy in Nigeria hasn't worked really. And would we complain with a strong leader in Nigeria, uncorruptible strong leader in Nigeria, that wasn't, I don't want to use the term dictator, but was very dominant. Was very dominant, but was a national figure who helped develop the country beyond our imagination. And in the next 20 years, we have 10% growth every year. Everybody's at school. Schools are built, roads are built, the whole infrastructure is built. But if you criticize, you might disappear. I'm not advocating it, but I'm saying that most other nations, that's what they had. They had strong leadership that was kind of domineering, that they did all that. And once they had the economic power, they then did the liberal democracy afterwards. So why I link all this to Brexit is because we have to understand that the European Union has, as I said, Europe has always fought each other. When Britain leaves, there is a possibility that African countries can negotiate with Britain and get trade deals. But Britain is going to be weaker. So this is where I would say there's an opportunity. Because Britain is no longer the Britain it was 50 years ago. Now when Britain's on the negotiating table, they said we're going to get a trade deal with India. India's $2.6 trillion economy, 1.2 billion population. India are going to say to them, and they've already said it, if you want us to do trade with you, we want 50, 60,000, 100,000 Indians to come here and study and work. Well, Africa's going to say the same thing. Unless our leaders let us down, because we know we have some bad governance in Africa. But if we have some decent leaders in Africa, they should say the same. Yeah? If you want to do a deal with us, you have to allow our people visas to come here and study, visas to come here and work. It's only fair. If you want to do business with us, you can come to our countries and live, and we know you don't come and live amongst us. You go and open an international school, and you send your children to an international school, and you teach them to support England in cricket and football, and you don't integrate into the country, and then when you're ready, you just come back to England. Okay? Some of the African countries are starting to understand and asking for the diaspora. You know, this is the year of the diaspora. The African Union has said this is the year of return. They're saying to Africans around the world, not necessarily return physically, but return mentally and economically. Why do you think I'm going to Rwanda? I'm going to Rwanda to explore opportunities and to explore whether I could live there, as well as other places. And if the worst thing, I'll get a nice week. But I'm seriously going there to look at it and look at what's going on there. Some interesting things. They said they model themselves on Singapore. I want to go and see what's going on there. You know, the highest level of number of women in parliament in the world, Rwanda. 50% of the parliament, women. Of the cabinet, women. Education for all. Small fees. Medical cover for everybody. Small fees. Every child a laptop. You go to Kigali, you can eat your food on the floor. People say because we're in a poor country, that's why it's dirty. No, it's not. It's bad governance. We can have the place clean, whether you're poor or not. Kigali shows that example, right? So this is some of the things I'm going to look at. So what I say about Brexit is that we may have an opportunity, if Britain leaves, to negotiate. Because Europe is stronger resisting because they negotiate as a group. So if you try and get into Europe, you have to negotiate with the whole of Europe. You see how Britain said they can get a deal? The whole of Europe say no, this is the best deal you're going to get. And they all stay the same. You try and get a split. Let's interview the French president. They says no, we agree with the deal. You interview the Belgian Prime Minister, you interview, wherever you go in Europe, try and get a split. They all say no, we all agree. This is what we need to do. So one of the lessons I think for Brexit for us is about how we can integrate. Because one of the weaknesses in Africa today is that they pick us off. We have Ivory Coast and Ghana, two major cocoa producers. Because we're not unified, Belgium, which is famous for chocolate, even though they don't produce any cocoa, yeah? Like Britain is famous, English tea. Everybody in Nigeria, you've heard of English tea with your things like this, and you have English tea, right? Tea doesn't come from England. There cannot be a concept of English tea. It doesn't make any sense to have the language English tea. Because there's no tea come from England.
Like French fries.
Like French fries. Yeah? So one of the things we can learn from this experience of European integration is we can learn from the best of the governance. We can also learn from the disintegration. Because where Europe was strong, and still remains strong, is if I want to buy cocoa from Ghana or Ivory Coast, I can play one against the other. How much are you going to give me for the cocoa? And then we agree, right? You say 350, right? I come over to Ivory Coast, how much are you giving me? And we play one against the other, so you're bidding down the price. If we unite in Africa, I go to you, you told me the price is £10 a kilo. Okay, let me try this one here. How much is it? And you told me the same price, £10 a kilo. Because we're one as Africa now. If you want cocoa from us, this is the price. Take it or leave it. Now they can't leave it because otherwise their production is going to crash. They have to buy it at that price. But when we're not united, they play one against the other and they can play one all the time. And this is what they're doing in Africa all the time. What we want is one tariff, one price. That's why we want one currency, because again, you can't play a game between the Naira, play the game between the franc, or any other currency in Africa. If we all had one currency, nothing wouldn't make any difference. You all trade in one currency, one passport, you can work anywhere, travel anywhere. People would be less likely to come to Europe if you could go and get an education and study and work in other parts of Africa. Why would you come all the way here? Yeah, as soon as you put your name on a form, who was it I was talking to earlier? As soon as you put your name on the form, you get an interview? Yeah. It's a bit more tricky, right? So this is one of the things why I think one of the big lessons we can have about Brexit and Africa is the opportunities we have to learn from the best of the governance and keep the worst aside. Now, one of the risks with integration, Nigeria is pondering. Nigeria hasn't signed the agreement yet. So you guys need to pressure your government. Sign it. Nigeria is wavering because Nigeria is thinking we're big, we've got a big economy, why are we signing it? So there's a bit of a Brexit situation going on here because Nigeria thinks we're big players. Why do we need integration? Yeah? Because everybody in Africa is going to come to Nigeria to live. I don't think that's going to happen. But it's the kind of the language of Brexit, a little bit, isn't it? If we sign this, everybody's going to come here, we're going to have floods of immigrants. We've got to be careful with the word immigrant. So is a Ghanaian an immigrant? Is an Angolan an immigrant? We have to be careful, isn't it? So we have to look at how we integrate, because one of the issues that they're arguing here is that they opened the borders of Europe and they didn't sign the agreement that stopped the European integration, because what they thought, Britain misinterpreted the situation and thought not many would come from the extension countries like Poland. And of course, when that agreement was signed, thousands and tens of thousands of people from Poland and Eastern Europe came here. And a lot of the white working class got very, very uncomfortable with that situation and said, the reason why I can't get my child in a school is because of that Eastern Europeans that have come here. The reason why I can't get an appointment with my GP is because all the Eastern Europeans are ahead of me. The reason why I'm not getting enough resources, a flat, a house, is because of the immigrants. This is a lie. Look at the evidence. The NHS is about 28 billion or something like that. The NHS did a calculation, worked out it was like 5 million or something that they're spending on people who come from abroad who might want a bit of healthcare. It's insignificant in the budget. The reason why you can't get to see your GP is because you have a government that has had austerity for the last 10 years. Isn't it? The reason why you can't get council flat and a council house, nothing to do with immigrants, is because they're not building enough social housing. You go to Barking and Dagenham. I did an inspection in Barking and Dagenham when I was at the Audit Commission, and they had voted the BNP. You know what the BNP is? BNP is British National Party. It's like the pre-kind of UKIP party, very racist party, right? They were in opposition in Barking and Dagenham. Barking and Dagenham is in East London. East London is a traditional working class white area, and Barking and Dagenham is where Ford used to be based. And of course Ford is, all this production and that industrialisation has crashed in the UK. So where you could be a white working class, gone to school, not get one qualification, you could just walk into apprenticeship at Ford, get a job, work on the production line, get a Ford car, and retire and just work there forever, get council flat, and everything was nice, yeah? So now, where the government has changed policies and not building the properties and the industrial changes have happened, the politicians are now using that excuse, rather than say it's our fault, the British government's fault, they say it's Europe's fault. It's because all the Europeans come over here, that's why you can't get a council flat. That's why you're not getting the NHS treatment. It's not that, it's because you're not putting enough money into it. You see my point? So the danger is we have to be really careful here. That is the whole argument of Brexit, is trying to trick the people into believing that the reason for their economic situation is because of Europe. What's it got to do with Europe? Do you know every time you cut taxes in this country, how much it's worth? If you cut income tax by 1%, it is worth £6 billion. So every time the government give a tax cut, they have to take £6 billion out of the government's pocket. So if I give you back £1 for every £100 you earn, it's not going to make you rich. Most people in this country, most Africans in this country, how much are they earning? So if I give you back 1% tax cut, what you've got a benefit? Oh, right, I'm going to be so better off this year because I'm going to have £400 more than last year. We're going to do it £400. You can't even go on holiday with it. What can you do with £400? It's not going to change your life. You're not even going to notice. When you spread that over 50 weeks, it's insignificant. 1 cup of coffee or something like that. But that 6 billion is taking out the economy. That's 6 billion coming out of schools, 6 billion coming out the NHS, 6 billion coming out the roads, 6 billion coming out of social housing. Okay? Who needs social housing more than anybody else? The working class and us. Because we tend to be on the lower economic ladders in this country, true? Now in Barking and Dagenham, one of the things that happened is a lot of Africans and a lot of Nigerians moved to Barking and Dagenham. You know why? Because the housing was one of the lowest priced housing in London, because it was out of London, but they had good transport links because it has the district line and it has good transport links there, and it's got lots of open spaces. So a lot of Africans were working in civil service and public sector jobs and said, you know what, we can get a property back in the Dagenham because the house price is not so expensive. But the white working class are watching this and thinking, all these new properties are being built here, and it says L&Q on the board. L&Q is a housing association, and they see all these Africans moving in, and then UKIP come along and tell them that look at all these Africans getting all this housing ahead of you who've been living here for all these years. So what does that make you do? It makes you more racist, because you're blaming now the Africans who have moved in for taking your properties. But guess what? Most of those properties are private. They're not from the council. It's because people went there and got a mortgage and bought those properties. But the look to the working class who are watching this neighborhood thinking, but 10 years ago it was all white. Now there's all these thousands of Africans moving in here and they're all getting our housing and getting our properties. But they were being bought. And guess what? All the people buying their properties, are you not paying taxes? Are you not paying council tax? So all the services in the local area, you're paying taxes for it as well. So when we go to use the NHS, we've paid for it already. I've paid a huge amount of taxes in this country. So everything I claim and use in this country, I've paid for already. So it's not you giving it to me, I'm giving it to you. Because actually, I'm earning more than many of you. The things you have to look at in Europe is we've subsidized Europe for 500 years. So we have to be careful. And also, the biggest subsidy of all has been us and our resources. So we don't owe Europe anything, Europe owes us in that context. So one of the lessons from Brexit and the key things, message I'll leave you with is that there is an opportunity. What do you think is the economy of Africa? Because they're always telling us we're poor. I did some research on it. India has a $2.6 trillion economy. The combined GDP of Africa is 2.3 trillion. How many people knew that? The combined GDP of Africa, 2.3 trillion. We're already like a superpower, but we don't know it. And you think that 2.3 trillion, and only 16% we're trading with each other. What happens over the next 20 years if that goes from 16% to 50%? Where the trade is going inside Africa. Because if the trade is going inside Africa, it means the money's being spent locally, and then it's recycled back again. Yeah, so instead of me buying a pair of trainers or a car made in Europe, if I buy a car made in Africa, that's people who are getting paid for that car. That money is going to be recycled because the money that's going into your pocket, you're then going to spend that in your local economy. And it's recycling all the time. At the moment, the money going into Nigeria comes in and out. Isn't it? A lot of the wealth goes into Nigeria and is spent outside. Every time you buy the diamond rings and the Mercedes Benz and everything, and it's not made in Nigeria, the money is going outwards. You buy a house in Paris, you buy jewelry and trainers and God knows what. Lots of foolishness that we don't need, but even those products, people like products and like stuff, but if we were making them, we would keep it within our economies. So it's the externalization of the economies that is the big problem. That's why Europe remains the wealth in Europe. If 90% of Europe's trade is done within Europe, it means the money is just recycling around Europe. Yeah? So the wealth they're creating, they're just recycling around and they buy cars and stuff. That's what we need to do the same thing. So one of my biggest messages on Brexit is I'm not sure it matters whether they leave or don't leave. We need to get our governance together. If we get our governance together, we will negotiate a better deal. Because look, we have 55 votes in the UN. China's one vote is worth more than our 55. We have 30 votes in the Caribbean. 30 nations in the Caribbean. So if the Caribbean and Africa team up, we've got 85 votes in the UN. And those 85 votes, if China put one vote, they outvote one to our 85 votes. So having all these nations is not to our advantage. If the Caribbean had one vote for 30 million people and 30 nations, they'd have more power. If Africa had one vote for 1.2 billion people and a massive economy, we'd have more power. So my argument today is that Pan-Africanism and united Africa is the only way forward. And if we look at our interests, the interest of Africa clearly is pro-Brexit or anti-Brexit makes no difference. What makes difference is how we're going to negotiate with whatever comes out of it. Because our trade with Britain is very, very small in Africa. The British trade is very small. We're doing about 500 billion with the European Union and only about 36 billion with Britain. So if we even lost all of Britain's trade, it's a very small percentage of the trade with Europe. So actually we don't want to lose the trade with Europe because it's a bigger pot. That makes sense. So actually we could do more in Britain, but the pot in Europe is still bigger because it's a bigger economy. Does that make sense? So I hope I've given you a kind of overview of the different perspectives about the whole Brexit situation, the context of how it came. European integration came about because of the wars and getting rid of the wars and using the integration. That's where it came from. We have to understand the same thing. We have an opportunity to learn from the best and learn from the mistakes that they've made in the European Union. Because what we don't want to see what happened in South Africa. When Zimbabwe was in economic trouble and people from Zimbabwe went to South Africa and they were beating them and saying, immigrants, we don't want these people coming and taking our jobs. We don't want to see that in Africa. Because that's the kind of message of UKIP. You see what I mean? That because Zimbabwe was in trouble, they went to South Africa. And remember, who helped South Africa when they were in apartheid? Zimbabwe, right? Now the Zimbabweans are in a bit of economic trouble. They come into South Africa and then they're beating them, setting fire to their property, burning down their shops and stuff, saying you're foreigners. How can you be a foreigner in Africa? You're African. Yeah, so we don't want to go down this same Brexit kind of road where Nigeria says we're not joining the club. Yeah, we're not joining the club with the African Union because we want to be separate, because we don't want all these immigrants coming and taking our jobs. If you start to hear that message in Nigeria, it's going to sound very similar to what's going on in England. Oh, the reason why you haven't got housing in Nigeria is because the Ghanaians came over. The reason why you haven't got good roads in Nigeria is because the Zimbabweans came. When you all know, when they weren't there, it made a difference. So they're just lying to you by telling you the reason why you haven't got good schools in Nigeria is because, oh, if the Ghanaians didn't come, we would have more schools for you. You would have healthcare. No, it wouldn't make any difference, would it? How many people in Nigeria? 108. So how many people are going to come? That's going to make that difference overnight. You're not going to get 50 million people coming tomorrow. It's not going to happen. Okay? There's enough for all of us to benefit from this. So my leaving message with you is this message here. What Nkrumah said back in the 1960s. Africa must unite. If we're going to look at Brexit from the African prism, we have to take the best, as I said, from Europe, which is some good examples of integration and working together as nation states. Okay? You don't have to have the total unification of Africa, because some people are very scared of that. I want the total unification, but even if you're scared of that, for the economic benefit, if we come together as a people, it will transform our reality. And we'll have so much more power when we negotiate with Europe or we negotiate with post-Brexit Britain, if we had a more powerful position. If we got $2.3 trillion in our pocket and 1.2 million marketplace, we got a lot of power when we come to the table and say to Britain, do you want part of that? Because you want to sell your goods to 1.2 billion people. True? And as the middle class in Africa grows, there's more disposable income to buy their goods. So we have a bit of bargaining power. They've only got 60 million in Britain for us to buy too. To sell to. Does that make sense? Yeah. So actually we have a lot of power here to say, hang on, we got 1.2 billion people here that could buy your products. So actually we're not coming to the negotiation table with our tails between our legs. We're coming here with something to offer you. So what are you offering us? We need a good deal. So we need to remember that. So I'll leave it there. Hopefully we'll have some really good discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It deserves a standing ovation. Thank you. Thank you. Talking about giving a new definition to keynote speaking. We have come to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And the bottom line is Africans need to grow their own economy to have economic power. Instead of the usual black is power and black and proud, we need to grow our economy, and that will speak for us. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together again for our keynote speaker, Dr. Asari.